let's talk about instruments. The reason I have this flame right here is to show you that the instruments that you heat up, I hope you were able to see it. So if I heat up this instrument just a little bit, it doesn't do much. No, wait. So if you wanted to melt something really bad, like really melt it, you just wait until this is red. This is gonna melt the whole thing away. And once you melt the wax like this with this, let me show you. You make it extremely hot. It's red, right? So now I'm gonna melt the wax right here. Once I melt it like this, now I can move it around, and that is gonna make it extremely smooth once it's cooled down. But also it allows me to move the wax without adding any more wax. Now if I just make it a little hot without doing all of that, I can add wax with this. If you make it extremely hot, it's very hard to add wax with it. So depending on how hot this instrument is, you can use it in very different ways. Now, do you have wax? This instrument right here is the PK1. I don't use it a lot, but it's very useful to add a lot of wax. Comparing this one to the PK2, you can add different types of wax with this. Like you can add a lot of wax with this one and a little bit of wax with this one. If I'm building up the tooth from scratch, I would use this one because it adds a lot of wax. This one is useful for doing the tip. So if I'm adding the tip to this premolar, I'll just make it a little hot, take some wax. So I heated the instrument, add some wax to it, and now I'm gonna heat it at a different side. So if I heat it right here, then I can just add the wax like this. So right like this. If I add the wax and just hold it right there till it's like cool down, the wax is not gonna go anywhere and it's gonna make a tip. So that's how you make the tip there. And you can have the whole type of it right here and make sure that the tip is in the right position. Now I see that it's not in the right position, definitely not in the right position. But that's how you add a little bit of wax. And if you wanted to add a huge amount of wax, you take the PK2, warm up the tip like this, add some wax to it, heat up, not the handle instead of the tip, take it and just drop it. So the difference between this tip that I just made and this one is that this one was done with the PK2, which is extremely skinny, right? And I added it on here and it's small and it will stay like that. But this one is like a whole, like it's like a hump right now because the PK1 adds a lot of wax. So those two instruments for adding wax. The next instrument is this beauty right here. It's the PK3, and the PK3 is useful in a lot of ways. I use it for making the embrasures, right, like this right here, and making the ridges. The ridges right here, making the central fossa. So it's like a carving down instrument, but it's very useful to it's very useful to carve down like a little, like tiny little bit of wax at a time. And then you can also just, it's kind of like you carve down, like when you're making the central fossa, you carve down like this, right? You're trying to make sure that the central fossa is going to line up with all central fossas right here. So make sure that when you're carving it down, you're doing it in the right position, making sure that they're all just lined up like this. you can just put this like this instrument right here like this, and you'll know that you're going in the right direction. So after you carve down a little bit here, then you can make the ridges. You can use it to just orient yourself. So the thing I've done right now while using this instrument, that I dug down too deep. So that's to show you that this can really dig down. So make sure to use it in the right way. So actually, since I've dug down too deep, now there's a way to cover this up. If I add a lot of wax, now I'm gonna have to take off again. So another thing that I could do is just melt the wax. So I make it extremely hot, make the PK2 extremely hot, and just move around the wax, just like this. So if you make it extremely hot, the wax will be extremely melted, and you can move it around. Now that we have gone over the PK3, the next instrument is the PK4, my favorite instrument. The PK4 is a carving instrument. It's this thing right here. One side of it is this one, and the other side of it is this. So there's different uses to both sides. They're both for carving down. This side, like this one right here, you can use it for the embrasures. If I wanted to carve down the embrasures a little bit, I can just use it through that. Depending on how I orient this, I could use it to carve down right here, just on the sides. Like, you see how this is way out? The best way to carve it down would be just to use this instrument right here. Just carve down. It's sharp, so make sure that you don't carve down too much, and you're always checking before you carve down a lot. So this is like the perfect instrument to do that. The other side of it is my favorite side because it's very useful for smoothing stuff out. I know it doesn't look like it smooths anything out, but let's say you take this facial side. It's not smoothed out right now. So what I would do is use the tip right here, this tip right here, and I would go in this direction. I'm not taking anything off. I'm just taking a little tiny bit, and it will like make it so shiny. Just make sure that you're going in the direction that you want it to be shiny in, and make sure that it reflects light. So I went in an oblique manner for a little, like just touch up a little bit, and then in like up down motion, and then I'm gonna go on the other side and do the same thing. This is just for smoothing it out. When you're smoothing it out, you're not trying to take off a lot of wax, and you're trying to make sure that it's just shiny. After you smooth it out like this, you can use the stocking, and do you have a stocking? After you carve down just a tiny bit with this, you can use the stocking, wrap it around your hand like this, your finger, not your hand. And you go over it just in the direction, same direction that you were waxing at, you were carving at. Another thing you could do with the stocking is wrap it around a Q-tip and use it in that way too. Anyway, this is the best way to wax it. If you see, it's way more shiny. One other thing that I do when I'm about to, when I'm not done, but I'm trying to make sure that it's shiny, is I heat up the PK2 a lot. The PK2 at the tip. It's red, shiny, like it's red, and it's very hot right now. So I could just melt down the wax right here. This is something that you shouldn't do, like not for the first time in lab. You should try to do at home and see if it works out for you. but making it extremely hot and moving the wax around, it helps me just make sure that it's smooth before I start carving. This is not the last step. This is like the first step of shining. So you see how it's like not too shiny? Now from here I can carve down with the PK4. Just carve down a little tiny bit. So it's kind of obvious that on this side, the PK4 does not carve down as much on this side. This side right here is like to carve like down a lot of wax. So what I do is go over it with the PK4, smooth it out a little bit, then go over it again. I messed it up because I didn't wait for it to cool down before I start carving. And it's very important that you make sure that it's cool before you start carving. But you'll see that if I go over it and I'm diligent with it, it will be shiny at the end. Don't do this if you don't have time. If you don't have time, just use your stocking and just smooth it out. Dip some cotton in like some soapy water and just put that over here and use the stocking. That's it. It will be shiny. Yeah. So while doing that, I also ended up making sure that it's aligned. Always check to make sure that it's aligned on this side, on the buckle side. Then make sure that it's aligned on the lingual side. You can always compare this side to this side and see if they're aligned. Another use of the PK4, making ridges. Now it's sharp, so you gotta make sure that you don't dig in, but depending on how you orient it, you can make the ridges. If you're really you're very light with your hands when you're carving down, this can easily be done with the PK4. The motion is what's making the ridges. So make sure that you know what direction you're going into. Don't take off too much. And when you're trying to make ridges, like a ridge is like a mountain, so you're just trying to carve down the two sides of the mountain. So if there's a ridge right here that I'm trying to make, it's like a hump right here. So I carve down on this side, and then I carve down on this side, and that's how you make them. Alright, so that was the PK4. Next instrument is the Alright, another carving instrument. I cannot find the name of it.
The
But
spatula.
it's this one.
The spatula. Spatula.
It's the spatula. Is it spatula? Nettle carver.
So this is the spatula, and that's the nettle carver.
Yes.
Rounded end.
Yeah. I think. Yeah. This one is a carving instrument. The difference between this one and the PK4 is that this one is not as sharp. So this is good to use anywhere you want. Just make sure you don't go too hard with it. So if you're trying to round this down, especially if you're trying to make it round, you can carve it down slowly. You're sure that it's not gonna make a lot of damage. So you can carve it down like this. And you can carve this down if you needed to. I don't need to carve it down anymore. If you need to carve down the sides. It's a blunt instrument, so you can just carve down anywhere you want. This is a very good instrument to make the little pits we need right here on both sides. It's an easy way to make the pits. So you just carve down. Always make sure that the central fossa aligns and that this pits and this pits are kind of similar. The other side of it, I wouldn't like, this doesn't carve down anything, but you can use it like this. It's too blunt for me to use, but if you use this one, you're sure there's not going to be a lot of damage. This is cool. Next one is the spatula. They use this to put a lot of wax on the wedge, like a lot of wax. This is the first one that they normally teach you how to use. So you make it hot. You dig in there like this. Now to deposit the wax, you just heat it up again. And now you have heated up wax. And you can just put it on there if you need it to. The other side of this is this end. Perfect for making same ridges. And the dip right here. So you can just carve it down like this. Those are all carving instruments. So this can be used again to make ridges. Barrier probe. Necessary if you're trying to measure everything. So if you want to measure this, just go on this side to this premolar and just measure from the CEG to the tip. And not CJ, the visual CJ anyway. You can measure it and go over here. Make sure that you have the same measurement. This is too tall, definitely too tall. Another thing you can measure is this thing right here. The distal and mesial marginal ridges. Make sure that they're equal on both sides. Another thing that you'd measure is the difference between one cusp to the other, from one tip to the other. That is very useful. If you think it's like too wide, you just measure it. And this allows you to know, like this cusp right here, it's too far away from this cusp right here. And they're supposed to be aligned. Right here, they're aligned. So you know that you need to align it, but you don't even know how much of this you want to take off. So you just measure it. You measure this side. And you measure this other side, and that will really help you. Same here. Measure it. Measure to the cusp tip, and that will let you know that this cusp tip is so short compared to this one. I love this Barrier probe. Next instrument, another blunt carving instrument. This is a nice instrument that doesn't have another end, so it's just used for carving. You can carve down with it. Very blunt, more detailed than the other blunt instruments. So yeah, just use it for carving.